Medieval husbands locked their wives in iron cages. Or did they? What if I told you the most shocking methods medieval men used to control their wives were far more brutal and sophisticated than anything Hollywood has ever shown you? Today, we're exposing the 7 terrifying methods medieval husbands really used to ensure their wives' fidelity, and the truth will change everything you thought you knew about medieval marriage. Are you ready for the real story? Because we're about to dive into methods so psychologically devastating, they'd make modern manipulators jealous. Chastity belts. Let's start with the most infamous method, the chastity belt. You've seen them in movies, heard the jokes, but the reality of these medieval torture devices was far more horrifying than any Hollywood depiction could capture. Picture this. A contraption made of iron and leather, designed to completely encase a woman's most intimate areas, with only small holes for basic bodily functions. These weren't just symbols of oppression, they were instruments of physical and psychological torture that could be worn for months, even years at a time. The wealthy merchants of medieval Italy were among the first to perfect this barbaric practice. When Venetian traders left for months-long journeys to Constantinople or the Silk Road, they would literally lock their wives into these metal prisons. The key would travel with the husband, sometimes thousands of miles away, leaving the woman completely helpless. But here's what's truly disturbing. These devices weren't just about preventing adultery, they were about complete control over a woman's body and mind. Imagine the psychological horror of being unable to properly clean yourself, of developing painful sores and infections, of being reminded every single moment of every single day that your husband didn't trust you. The medical consequences were devastating. Medieval physicians wrote about women developing severe infections, abscesses, and even gangrene from prolonged use of chastity belts. Many women died not from infidelity, but from the very devices meant to prevent it. Yet husbands considered this an acceptable risk to protect their honor. Some chastity belts were designed with spikes on the inside, ensuring that any movement would cause pain. Others had elaborate locking mechanisms that would require multiple keys, with different family members holding different keys to ensure the woman could never convince just one person to free her. The psychological torture was often worse than the physical pain. Women would develop severe anxiety, depression, and what we would now recognize as PTSD from the constant reminder of their imprisonment. Many went mad from the isolation and helplessness, but perhaps most disturbing of all were the temporary chastity belts used during social gatherings. Husbands would lock their wives into these devices before parties or festivals, then unlock them afterward, but only if the wife could prove through witnesses that she had behaved appropriately. This created a culture of surveillance where other women would spy on each other to gain favor with the men. The craftsmanship of these devices shows just how seriously medieval society took this practice. Skilled blacksmiths specialized in creating custom chastity belts, with some featuring intricate engravings, precious metals, and even gemstones. The wealthy would commission elaborate versions as a symbol of their paranoia and control. Don't think this was just an Italian phenomenon either. Archaeological evidence shows chastity belts were used across medieval Europe, from the castles of England to the merchant houses of Germany. Each region developed its own variations, each more cruel than the last. Sacred vows, holy relics. Picture this: a stone church in 1347, flickering candles casting dancing shadows, and a terrified young bride kneeling before the altar. But this isn't just any wedding ceremony. The husband places his hand on a bone fragment supposedly from Saint Agnes, the patron saint of chastity, and makes his wife swear an oath so binding that breaking it would damn her soul for eternity. We're talking about oaths sworn on actual pieces of saints, where the psychological pressure was so intense that many women believed God himself was watching their every move. Think prenups are harsh? Medieval wives had to swear their fidelity to God, their husband, and an entire community that would monitor their every interaction with another man. But religious pressure was just the beginning. Some husbands took a more architectural approach to the problem. Tower imprisonment. Imagine being locked in a stone tower, your only companion the echo of your own voice bouncing off cold walls. This wasn't just the stuff of fairy tales, it was a real strategy used by paranoid medieval husbands. Take the case of Marguerite de la Barre in 14th century France. Her husband, convinced she was having an affair, literally had a tower built on their estate with only one window facing directly toward the main house so he could watch her at all times. She spent 3 years in that tower. 3 years. The psychological torture was the point. It wasn't just about preventing affairs, it was about breaking down the woman's spirit so completely that she'd never even think about defying her husband again. But not every husband could afford to build a prison, so they got creative with family resources, family surveillance networks, medieval helicopter parents taken to the absolute extreme. Imagine if your in-laws weren't just annoying, They were literally hired to spy on you 24/7. Wealthy medieval husbands would pay family members, sisters, mothers, even children from previous marriages to watch their wives constantly. We're talking about a medieval surveillance state where every conversation, every glance, every trip to the market was reported back to the husband. From the guard's perspective, it was often lucrative work. A brother-in-law could earn more money spying on his sister than most peasants made in a year. But here's the twisted part. Sometimes the watchers became the problem. Medieval court records are full of cases where the guardian ended up seducing the very woman he was supposed to protect. Talk about job hazards. Forced convent exile. Stone corridors echoing with chanted prayers, the scratch of quill and parchment, and the rustle of rough wool habits. For some medieval wives, the convent became both punishment and sanctuary. Husbands would literally dump their wives at convents, sometimes permanently. These women weren't becoming nuns by choice. They were being imprisoned in holy places. Days started at 4 a.m. with prayers, included hours of manual labor, and ended with more prayers. No speaking during meals, no contact with the outside world, no physical comfort. But here's the plot twist that'll blow your mind. Many women preferred this to marriage. Medieval nun chronicles reveal that some exiled wives found peace, education, and genuine female friendship for the first time in their lives. Yet, for those who couldn't be hidden away in towers or convents, medieval husbands had a more public approach. Public shame rituals. Before social media existed to destroy reputations, medieval communities had perfected the art of public humiliation, and nothing controlled behavior like the fear of becoming the town's entertainment. Picture the town square on market day. The wife stands on a platform while her husband announces her renewed commitment to virtue to the entire community. She has to publicly confess any inappropriate thoughts and swear an oath witnessed by everyone she'll ever see again. The crowd watches, judges, and remembers. This is basically medieval cancel culture, except instead of Twitter destroying your reputation, it was literally everyone you'd ever known making your life impossible if you stepped out of line. But some husbands turned to even darker methods that ventured into the supernatural. Supernatural protection. When religion and social pressure weren't enough, some medieval husbands literally tried to use magic to control their wives. Yes, you heard that right. Medieval marriage sorcery was a real thing. They'd hire local wise women to create fidelity charms, amulets sewn into clothing, herbs hidden in food, even spells carved into wedding rings. One 15th century English manuscript describes a ritual where the husband would bury a piece of his wife's hair under their doorstep while reciting incantations. Now, did these spells actually work? Of course not. But the psychological effect was devastating. Imagine living with someone who believed they had magical control over your thoughts and desires. But here's the method that actually worked. The one that was so effective, it became the foundation of medieval marriage itself: economic control. The most effective prison wasn't made of iron or stone. It was made of coins, contracts, and complete financial dependency. This was the method that actually controlled medieval wives because it made rebellion literally impossible. Meet Isabella de Fordes, one of the wealthiest women in 13th century England. When she married, everything she owned, land, money, even her jewelry, legally became her husband's property. She went from controlling vast estates to needing permission to buy thread. This wasn't unusual, this was the law. Here's what's really shocking. This economic control was so comprehensive that most medieval wives literally couldn't survive without their husbands. No money, no property, no legal rights, no job opportunities. Economic dependence was the ultimate chastity belt, and it was 100% legal. Now, before you start thinking medieval marriage was just one long horror story, here's the truth that might surprise you. Most medieval marriages weren't actually like this. These extreme cases became legendary precisely because they were extreme. Most medieval couples worked together out of necessity, running farms, businesses, raising children in a world where survival required teamwork. The obsession with controlling wives was typically reserved for the wealthy, the paranoid, or the genuinely unstable. But these methods reveal something fascinating about medieval fears. Medieval men weren't just afraid their wives would cheat, they were terrified of losing social status, inheritance disputes, and being seen as weak by other men. The wife's fidelity was really about the husband's reputation. Before we judge medieval people too harshly, ask yourself, what are the modern equivalents? Location tracking on phones, social media monitoring, joint bank accounts that limit independence? Some of these medieval methods have just evolved, not disappeared. So what can we learn from this dark chapter of marital history? And which of these methods was actually the most effective? So there you have it, 7 methods medieval husbands used to control their wives, from the brutal physicality of chastity belts to the subtle psychological warfare of economic dependency. Each method was designed to break down a woman's will, her spirit, and her sense of self. Which method do you think was most effective? The physical torture of chastity belts, the psychological horror of tower imprisonment, or the complete helplessness of economic control? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this with someone who thinks medieval times were romantic. Next week, we're exploring the shocking wedding night traditions that were literally life or death for medieval brides. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.